Welcome to It's All Your Fault on True Story FM, the one and only podcast dedicated to helping you with the most challenging human interactions, those involving someone with a high conflict personality. I'm Megan Hunter, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Eddy.
Hi, everybody.
We are the co-founders of the High Conflict Institute and conflictinfluencers.com, where we focus on training, consulting, coaching, classes, and anything to do with how to handle high conflict people, high conflict situations. Welcome, listeners. Thank you for joining us today. In today's episode, we are going to analyze Oprah's conversation on her YouTube channel on why adult children cut ties with parents, a topic that clinical research now shows affects millions of families. Her conversation with Dr. Joshua Coleman, a psychologist and author of Rules of Estrangement, was very inspiring, I should say, and it got a lot of press. So let's break down today what's happening socially, psychologically, and emotionally, and does high conflict have anything to do with it? Who's at fault? Is anyone at fault? So, Bill, this video that Oprah put out is really about why adult children are cutting ties with their parents, which is kind of a rather new phenomenon, with language that kind of was never used in the past. I don't know about you. I suspect that you didn't grow up with the concepts of going no contact with your parents. That wasn't something that I grew up with.
Not an option. Not even a thought. Not even a thought.
Right, exactly. It seems to me kind of the norm now. I think if you asked my adult kids, some of them might know about it, some might not. And no one's gone no contact with me yet. So that's good news. But I think it is more of a norm for the younger generation. So how did we get here? And is it a good thing? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, our background in family law has given us a lot of history and insight and information about estrangement and alienation in the divorce context, family law. It's a lot more common there, or at least was in the past, than just out in ordinary society in the non-divorce world. So I guess more with an intact family. So now we're looking at perhaps a similar problem, maybe not, from a different angle. Adult children who are going no contact with their parents. So in the first part of the video, Oprah notes that 1/3 of Americans go no contact. And she frames this as a cultural shift. So does that number seem about right to you? Too low, too high? What's the research say, Bill?
Well, what's interesting is the current issue of Psychology Today, the magazine, the November-December issue, includes an article called Healing Family Splits and has some statistics.
Nice.
And they match what Oprah's talking about. So one of the articles in there says in the US, 26% of adults reported estrangement from their father and 6% from their mother. So you put those together, you got 32%. There's your third of adults. Notably, though, it says the US study also found that most estranged adult children eventually reconnect, 81% with their mothers and 69% with their fathers. The data suggests estrangement is often temporary rather than permanent, and in many ways that's good news. But there's a lot to discuss why this happens. So
yes. So let's kind of let's start with kind of where Oprah and Dr. Coleman started, that being a rather new phenomenon. They noted that the old values and concept of honor your father and mother are now a thing of the past, which, I think shouldn't be a surprise with the high rates of divorce and just the disintegration of the family. Or I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I guess the disintegration of that core family unit, right? There's ancillary problems that come with divorce, like alienation and just different problems, empowerment of children and disempowerment of children. the rise of social awareness about mental health issues. In fact, Dr. Coleman said that the number one reason stated in letters to him from people who've done this is protecting my mental health. So, Bill, we'll talk about a lot of reasons, but are we creating a weaker society? Or are people evolving, on the other hand, to become more self-aware and healthier?
I think it's a problematic direction, and in a sense, we're in from many directions creating a weaker society with fewer conflict resolution skills. So that seems to be, in my mind, many reasons why, it's always easier to just give up on somebody than to kind of struggle through. And we see that in a lot of the high conflict divorce cases. So that's one factor, is we're weakening our conflict resolution skills, which is unsustainable. You can't have a society without conflict resolution. And everybody needs to know how to do this. To
Right.
me, to me, another big factor, and I talked about this in that interview I did with Andrew Huberman, that most people don't talk about. I think smaller family size is part of the issue. I was one of four kids. You were one of four kids, right?
Yep.
And I had cousins that were eight kids. Um, and it wasn't something, you were part of this family, and you could kind of back off from so and so a bit without having to reject the family, reject a parent, do all of that. So there was a lot of having to be flexible. And the
And
great
I would add, sorry to interrupt, that on the flip side, there's a lot of support, right?
yeah.
I mean, my mom was one of 11 children. My dad was one of 8. My mom was the youngest. My dad was the oldest in their respective families. I had 75 first cousins. And I recall my mom talking about uh, having so much support from her
Yeah.
siblings. They didn't have sibling rivalry. They didn't have cross words with each other. They were each other's best friends and they supported each other. So I hadn't thought of that, Bill. And I think
It's
there's something to that, the smaller families.
because in smaller families, the relationships are more intense. And so if you're the only child and your parents are having a conflict, there's a good chance they're coming to you. In the larger families, in the more tight-knit communities, um, parents went to their neighbors, went to their own brother or sister to complain about their spouse. It wasn't that all marriages were happy and then now with divorce they're not. It's always been up and down, up and down, up and down. But another factor, I think, is mobility. See, I see this in this kind of bigger way,
Yeah.
that society mobility, you can leave the state of your
For the country.
parents, the country of your parents. You can really get far away if you want. So smaller families, more mobility. But another factor that I didn't realize till I was writing our new world of adult bullies, and that is bullies used to be on the fringe of families, on the fringe of communities. It's like, if you don't behave, you're not going to have friends. What's happening today is, with social media, bullies are finding each other online and reinforcing their bullying behavior and their distorted perceptions. And so what's happening is people are forming new teams, new families that sometimes are quite dysfunctional. And then that team or that new social media family says how rotten your parents were. There's that emotional pull. And I remember as a kid, kids talk about their parents and teenagers complain about their parents forever, but you don't leave the family. You just vent to your friends, then you come home and you
Yeah.
find ways to get along. So this new element, I think, of social media communities in the our New World of Adult Bullies book, I call it an anti-community, that people are forming anti-communities today
Mm.
where the purpose of the community is to be against somebody else. And in many cases, that's people's parents. And like you were saying, Megan, about mental health, often these communities talk about mental health and how it's all the parents' fault. And so you're right to cut off that evil mom or terrible dad.
Because you're
And
a
so,
victim.
yes,
You're
you're
their
a
victim.
victim. Oh, we're really in a victim society right now, I
Yeah.
think. And and in many ways, high conflict people see themselves as victims, and yet they're often perpetrators of domestic violence, of child abuse, of other bad behavior. And the people doing that feel like they're victims, so they're justified in doing that. And then they get social media anti-communities that reinforce that justification. And so we kind of have this push pull. And to me, it really comes down to we've got to have more skills and also be much less judgmental about other people and think in terms of problem solving. And a lot of this in divorce cases, child comes home from visitation or weekend with dad and says, dad wouldn't look at my picture. And mom says, oh, dad's a jerk. I always thought that. Or mom says, well, maybe show it again an hour later when he's not as distracted, or he might see that. We're not teaching problem solving, we're teaching blame. And to
Mm,
me, that's what we need to
mm.
shift.
Yeah. Yeah, and really what we're talking about here, Bill, is the US experience, or the Western experience, I should say, because I think we both observed, I know personally I've observed many from outside the US who have a very strong familial culture. And the parents are still the anchors,
Mm-hmm.
and the children from the time they're born through the end of their lives know what their role is.
Mm-hmm.
And they do respect their parents and honor their parents. And it seems to function well for the most part, right?
Right.
It's for us, it's sort of needing skills. For other cultures, it is the mindset, it is the culture, it is the norm, that you are going to always take care of your parents. And I think we flipped that around in at least in the US society to we look at our kids for the relationship, for more of a source of strength instead of the other way around. So it's like there's this
Right.
role shifting, unfortunately, instead of seeing that. So I wish we had a magic wand we could just wave and kind of get us back to that. There's just so many different fractures and different reasons, and it's like the decision to go no contact is, like you said, the blaming solution. It's not the problem solving solution. Perhaps the problem solving solution is to, if you want, to go to therapy to strengthen yourself and your own
Right.
resilience, so that you can have a better relationship with that person, or at least try to, right? It's still going to depend on that other person as well. But we now have this mentality that's set in cement that we just break contact. I don't need them anymore. And it's
Yeah.
empowered, like you said, with those anti-communities. But at the end of the day, are those anti-communities going to be there for you? Who's going to be there for you when you're sick? Who's going
Right.
to be there for you when you're on your deathbed? Are
Well,
they
see,
going to be there? Sometimes they might, but usually it's family. Sometimes not.
right. Well, the thing about family is they're supposed to take you in regardless of everything. And an anti community often pushes out its own members because, hey, you really made me angry. I'm cutting you off now. So an anti community is built around rejecting people. And so anti communities are unsustainable because they reject each other. But I want to get a kind of a footnote in here. As a therapist and dealing with high conflict, there's a small percent of parents who really you need to get away from to get healthy. And I think of it as more like 3 to 5% of parents. And that I've counseled people whose parents were terribly physically abusive, sexually abusive, verbally abusive. And to get healthy themselves, they need to get away from all those negative messages. And so there are cases where it's appropriate, but I think it's been exaggerated, and that people go, oh, well, my parents, one of those horrible people. Well, what did they do? Well, they look cross-eyed at me, once a year or
Yeah.
something like that. But I also want to add something. This research I read to you, there's also research from Germany, which is similar. And I wanted to mention, it says in Germany, one study found 20% of adults estranged from their father, 9% from their mother. In the US, it was 26% from father, 6% from mother. So Germany isn't all that different.
Mm.
But I think, again, when you're talking about culture, I think the larger families, um, and also often religion's a factor that holds people together. And so I think of, I'm here not very far from Mexico, and it's interesting the sense of family and happiness in Mexico is much stronger than in the US. And I think part of it is larger families, part of it is Catholic families. The Catholic Church really holds Mexico together more than any church in the United States. And not promoting any specific religions, but the idea that our community supports, like neighborhood centers and not being able to just change states, have also helped in the past, help people hang together even when they were upset with each other. So it's but the goal to me isn't, we can't rewind society. We have to teach skills. We can
Yep.
deal with all this if we learn the right skills.
Yeah, because it's the wrong direction. That's the
Yeah,
wrong direction.
yeah, yeah.
So I think about not just the breakdown of the relationship then with the adult child's parents, right? That relationship, but it has a ripple effect into others. So I think we can talk about the most kind of public example of this right now is Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle.
Yeah.
They're very, their situation is quite public in cutting ties with, in Prince Harry's case, with his father, stepmother, brother, sister-in-law, and presumably niece and nephews. And on Meghan's side, it's been very public knowledge of this rift and cutting off of her own father and siblings. Right, so their two children now that removes three grandparents. So I don't know what the relationship is like between those children and their maternal grandmother, if any. I have no idea. But if so, that's just one grandparent when they could have four, right?
Right,
So,
right.
what does this teach children? And I know your answer, Bill. It doesn't teach them about relationship skills and valuing the relationships and conflict resolution skills.
I think it's so destabilizing. A lot of kids, especially from high conflict divorce, because that's what I see the most, in their 20s are really uncertain about forming any relationships. And we're looking at that, much later, that people are getting married, if they get married. A lot of young adults saying, I'm never going to have kids. Now, I know a lot of adults years ago said that too, and then they had kids. But I think we're seeing a fear of relationships, that pushing your parents away is easy, but then there's this loss, and a lot of that Psychology Today article talks about the emotional loss. It's like people aren't really happy rejecting all these family members. And that's part of why eventually people do uh, reconcile. But there's a loss there, sometimes 10, 20, 30 years, that people are unstable. So I think it destabilizes young adults, and that they're looking for community. They're looking for relationships and yet frightened of relationships. And that's where we teach about high conflict people, and this is 10% of society, but 90% of society basically isn't preoccupied with blaming others, doesn't have all or nothing thinking. Date those people, you know?
Right?
They're out
Marry and have
there.
children with
N
those.
Yeah, have kids with those people. That's 90% of people, who can be happy. And also, for high conflict people, work on yourself and find healthy people to be around. Don't find the support group that says everybody else is at fault and we're victims. Is find support people that say, "Hey, work on this, learn some skills, and you
Right.
can be happier."
Yeah, you don't have to bug out because the feelings are big. You don't
Yes.
have to bug out because you feel like running. That's when you have the instruction, give yourself the instruction to stay and, just shut your mouth for a little bit, sit through the feelings, think about it. Don't don't hash things out. Just, maybe seek help to have a conversation if that means a therapist or a conflict coach or something like that. But it doesn't need to be just cutting and running because I feel there's so much value that grandparents and extended family members can bring to young people, to these little grandchildren. And if they don't have that, where are they going to get that?
Mhm.
And it's sad. It's very similar to, divorce when a child doesn't get to experience much of a relationship with one of the parents and grandparents. There's a lot of grandparent alienation happening as well in our society. So it's, you're kind of, in a way, extracting something valuable from a child's life, even if you don't think
Mhm.
that grandparent or family member is a stellar human being, um, you can still teach your children um, how to be strong, how to manage their emotions, how to do the opposite things maybe that other family member is exhibiting, right?
Right.
Because I think what happens eventually is that pendulum swings. You know, now we'll have 1/3 of the US population who, went no contact. Their kids aren't getting to have relationship with their grandparents. They're probably going to really want that for their kids when they're older, right? When they start having children. I can only assume. It seems that the pendulum really swings, and then they'll probably be angry at their parents for cutting them off from their grandparents. So,
Right. Well, a lot of this stuff is intergenerational, just like we know, like domestic violence. If you have a parent with that, the child's going to grow up with that, and you're going to have a child who may be violent or a child who may be victim of domestic violence, and then they're going to grow up and pass it on. And that's where, it's interesting during divorce, we have an opportunity because the legal system's involved, judges are involved, to put people on a better path. And I feel very reaffirmed or something when I have divorced clients, mom or dad, about half and half, say at the end of the divorce, I feel like I'm a stronger person now because of what I've learned going through this
mhm,
process, because of the skills that I learned while I went through this process.
yeah.
And I think that's what we're about, you and I especially, is teaching people skills going through divorce. So you come out actually as stronger, healthier, happier people. And your kids do too by learning managed emotions, moderate behaviors, flexible thinking, checking yourself instead of pointing the finger of blame. I think that's the only way to really turn this around.
And it impacts not just the family. This impacts the workforce.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
And
You have
they need the same skills. And that's interesting because we started in family law, you and I, trying to train professionals. Then it came to all law. And then we quickly were asked before the end of the first year by people in the workplace, how can we get this training to our human resources and our employee assistance personnel and our managers? And so that's a lot of what we're doing.
Yeah,
Um,
and you
but
and you end up with, if you have a workforce that's full of people who, um, are prone to going no contact, what's your attrition rate going to be? when they get mad at you, and with that victim mentality, when they get mad at the organization and the company, as opposed to someone who's learned to manage their emotions, have moderate behaviors, flexible thinking, and take own their stuff, right, and not blame. Their resilience is going to be so much higher, and I would think that there's no doubt that flows into their career,
Mhm.
and having a more stick to it attitude, and probably makes for better leaders.
Yeah, and they have an opportunity, just like the courts do during divorce. In the workplace, managers, human resources, etc., leaders, owners, supervisors have the opportunity to help people get on a healthier path, help people learn skills. I think of a woman that came for consultation and she said, I just got a new boss. I got 2 years to retirement, and this new boss is really a high conflict person. And she persuaded me that that was true.
Yeah.
But she said, I kind of hide from her and run into my own office each day. And I said, try learning ear statements, statements showing empathy, attention, or respect. When you come in the beginning of the day, pop your head in your boss's office and say, you know, how was your weekend? Or that was a great presentation last week. Or connect with her. And after a month, she said, now I'm my boss's favorite employee.
Yep.
So teach people skills. Don't just give up. But so many people don't know their skills, and that the world isn't evil.
Right.
That, like, 10% of people are high conflict people, but they're not evil. And many of them are trying to learn skills to become. We get people say, I think I'm a high conflict person. Can you teach me not to lose my job? And I love it when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So, kind of wrapping this up, because the name of our podcast is It's All Your Fault. And sometimes we get lost in these conversations and we kind of forget that.
Yeah,
So, I mean, we've talked about that a bit here, but relationship terminations can be a very fine line. They can come from misunderstandings, communication breakdowns, distance, mobility, like you said. Sometimes another adult sibling driving a wedge between you and your parents, right?
right.
Um, can come from a spouse's jealousy about their spouse's relationship with his or her own parents, or from a high conflict situation in which either the adult child has a blaming high conflict personality, then very all or nothing. It's my way or the highway. You don't agree with me, you're out of my life. Or an adult child with a high conflict parent or parents who is perhaps being domineering, intrusive, vindictive. And then that adult child is just setting limits and imposing consequences. And I find this a lot in consultations and training, is that line between, am I setting a necessary
Right.
limit and imposing a necessary consequence, or am I just being all or nothing? So when
And
is it
that's
okay?
so important. Yes, because you can set little limits and have little consequences and improve relationships rather than just setting the biggest limit of all and cutting them off.
Nice.
Let me add a couple thoughts that I have. I want to
Sure.
make sure I get in here. High conflict people with high conflict personalities, we think of as preoccupied with blaming others, all or nothing thinking, unmanaged emotions, and extreme behaviors. Many people are born with those tendencies. It's not somebody's fault. It's not their parents' fault. But some people are born that way. And you said, like, a young adult may have these characteristics through no fault of reasonable parents. And I've counseled many families like this. So it's important to take fault out. It's all your fault. The title of our podcast is actually a joke. In other words, when people say it's all your fault, that's a problem. And
There's
so
a red flag.
that's a red flag. Yeah. And so the idea is, if you start thinking it's all somebody's fault, then you've got to check yourself, because that's part of high conflict thinking, is to think it's all somebody's fault. It may be mostly somebody else has a problem, but always look at what you can do. What can I do to make things better? And I think that's what we're trying to do. What can we do to educate people to try to help turn this around? So, but I want people to have empathy for high conflict people because they didn't choose to be this way. By young adulthood, this is their personality, from genetic tendencies at birth, early childhood experience, which could be positive and make those genetic tendencies really more subdued, high conflict stuff, or early childhood abuse, attachment disruptions, all that may reinforce this. Plus, the larger environment is reinforcing blame and not taking responsibility. So, just having empathy, I think, for the whole family is so important, even if you have to have little limits and little consequences. I guess that's the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Okay. Um, well, I think it's very interesting, and I hope that you, our listeners, are think about this in your own lives and what you're seeing around you, and just keep trying to influence in a positive way those around you, and try not to encourage no contact, but to help people explore and learn new skills. So thank you for listening today. You'll find the link to the Oprah interview video along with a few resources on our website, including all of our trainings we're doing this year for new ways where you can learn how to help clients and customers and things learn those 4 big skills we talked about. And we have our conflict influencer class starting up very soon. So if you're looking for training, consultation classes, anything to do with high conflict, let us know. highconflictinstitute.com or conflictinfluencer.com. Keep learning and practicing skills. Be kind to yourself and to others while we all try to keep the conflict small and find the missing piece.